Hello and welcome back to another edition of Press Pass on GNAT-TV. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today on Wednesday, March 29th. Also a great pleasure to be joined in the studio here by two distinguished journalists who are covering the local area like hand in a glove here. Great to have back with us Greg Sukiennik and Tory who write and report for the Bennington Banner and Manchester Journal. Gentlemen, great to have you with us. Thank you for making the time for this conversation. Greg, I thought we could maybe start with you and have you tell us a little bit about a story that you had in today's Banner about this proposed cell tower that might be built off of Depot Street in Manchester. What's going on with that?
Well, thanks for having us in, Andrew. We are at the very beginning part of the process by which AT&T wants to permit a 140-foot communications facility, they call it officially, a cell phone tower. And it would be on Side Road, which is behind Riverside Heights with Riverside Townhouses on Depot Street, sort of behind where the bagel shop is. Right. So they have already put up a balloon. That's part of the requirements, is that they float a balloon at the tower height to get an idea of what it might look like. So this is all part of a 60-day advance window that the applicant must start with in order to, before they actually apply for a certificate of public good. And that goes through the State Public Utilities Commission. So this is not one of these situations where the Select Board or the Development Review Board or the Planning Commission actually makes the decision. The state makes the decision on this. That's not to say, however, that the town doesn't have some say. And the Select Board and the Planning Commission and Town Manager Scott Murphy, all interested in having sort of a joint meeting with the applicant, possibly with the PUC, and with the public, just to get some more information about what this would look like, what the need is, and to hear concerns from folks. Now, the proposed site is in the R10 district in Manchester, so it's a residential district, and communications towers are not an approved use in that district. So, so there's right away there's some ground to be covered. But one thing I would say is that's so very early in this process. I mean, if this was the Boston Marathon, this is people milling around Hopkinton Green before they're actually called to the starting line. So.
Great metaphor.
That being said, there's so there's a lengthy process in front of us, and this is an area where if people have concerns, if people think that this should be sited somewhere else, or if people maybe are concerned about cell service in the North Shire, and whether one of the things that AT&T put forward in its advance notice was being able to improve emergency communications, for example. So they'll have the opportunity to present their need, and folks will have the opportunity to present their concerns, and then it goes through a process through the state.
So is that like a dead zone over in there where cell service is weak?
There are some dead zones that people are citing. If you've driven around and tried to have a hands-free conversation on your cell phone in Manchester, you've found those dead zones. All on your own. Apparently part of Depot Street, West Road, Barnumville Road. Those are the ones that were mentioned in the application.
I'm on T-Mobile, so everywhere is a dead zone.
So this, I guess, would try to that would be a good location, I guess, from the standpoint of the phone company.
Well, that's what they're saying, and I mean, certainly, I think what people want to hear is they want to hear from AT&T's experts and say, well, why does this need to be cited here? And, right. And then there very well might be some give and take about, well, what if we put it here? Or what if we put it here? What if right now, I think there's one tower, I think it was a cable television tower, if I'm told correctly, if I understood correctly. And what happened was a lot of antennas were put on the existing tower in order to facilitate the signal being able to get where it needs to go. I know in surrounding towns, there's antennas attached to existing structures. We don't have a smokestack or sort of an existing tall enough building really to be able to facilitate that. So, it should be an interesting process.
Sounds like it's going to be one of those situations where people might live within eyesight of it or in the view shed, as the saying goes, would be thinking, I get it.
That'll
but
be,
why can't it
I'm
be
sure
someplace else?
that, I mean, I wasn't here for the short but pretty vociferous debate over whether to put wind towers on Equinox Mountain or Mount Equinox. But I understand, that those kinds of aesthetic concerns are things that Manchester takes seriously, because that's what people come to Vermont to not see cell towers. So, but you can't make a call if that infrastructure isn't available.
Right.
So we shall see.
And there was vociferous pushback on that. I still remember. Well, all right. Well, let's we'll follow that for sure. That'll definitely be something interesting to see how that goes. But Tory, let me move over to you here and ask you about a story you had about folks who are living in motels or homeless folks who are taking part in the program that helped house folks who needed housing during the pandemic. The state is scaling that back, or I guess the number of people who can qualify for a motel is going to be limited.
Yeah, they're trying to scale it down, and as it stands right now, it would be at the end of the fiscal year. They'd all be out. Of course, they could extend it again. Going by Chloe Viner Collins, she's the executive director at the Bennington Coalition for the Homeless, and by her estimate, it was about 200 people in Bennington alone would be out on the streets. It's somewhere in the area of 2,000 across the state of Vermont and 200 in Bennington alone. And I met a couple of people at motels that are using the program, and it's obviously a complicated issue. Putting them in motels, basically by every legislator's admission, by Chloe's admission, it's a COVID Band-Aid on a non-COVID problem, and so we've been continuing. Now as we emerge out of the pandemic, we're still solving it that way, and there's some frustration over that. That a lot of that money. There's not a lot of housing for the homeless in Bennington. There's not a lot of shelters. I mean, we're talking there's a 9-family unit and another 16-bed unit for like single adults, and Chloe's been keeping another shelter open with grants, and but that's slated to close in April. So just as this is hitting, so there's some of the funding in that bill that passed. The federal funds for the program dried up, for the motel voucher program dried up, and now so it's almost $19 million was dedicated to in state funding towards it, and almost $14 million of that was towards housing those people through the end of June, if I remember correctly, and then $5 million of it is supposed to be allocated to funding to help those people that don't fall under the program. So the $14 million was for people that are homeless. Homeless that are vulnerable households is what the bill said, and that's anyone fleeing domestic violence, pregnant, with children, anyone over 60. There were a couple other provisions in there, but there's a good portion of people that doesn't apply to, and so in a place like Bennington, I don't really know where that $5 million would go, other than because like in Bennington's case, the shelters are already at capacity, so it's a matter like it's not enough money. There's not going to be enough money to go towards Bennington building the shelter, another shelter or something like that. Maybe it'll help Chloe keep that other shelter open, but that's. It was tough. It was tough to, they don't have a lot of answers right now. The legislator I spoke with was Robin Chestnut Tangerman, and he was, he said he had a good quote. He said it like things are moving at light speed in terms of legislation on that, because they are putting together some committees. They are working on some answers by May of next year is what they want to have something actually in place, and there will be a committee to report on that by January is the goal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's part of the whole larger housing problem, which we've all been talking about for several years now, well before the pandemic arrived. But Greg, there's also some movement, I guess, around the Depot Street project.
Right.
Is that beginning to
That's-
come to life again?
That proposal is still on the table. A lot has been discussed about 301 Depot Street, formerly the home of Manchester's town offices
Right.
and the police department. They moved up to their current location in the 1980s, I'm told. So, and they were leased by Manchester Designer Outlets. And that lease ends as of 11:59 p.m. on the 31st, which I think that's Friday. So, if we're watching this before or after. So now the town does not want to be in the landlord business. They would prefer to move this parcel along to productive use. And certainly housing being one of the biggest concerns that this community's had for a while, but that's certainly been heightened, only been heightened by the pandemic, by the rush of folks coming to the area and deciding to move here. Some of them, turning their second homes into permanent housing, some for themselves and their families, and telecommuting. Some folks taking the opportunity to invest in Airbnb properties, and just the general lack of housing that's been built in Vermont. I think the housing commissioner cited a study saying that the state would need to build 40,000 units in the next several years in order to catch up to where it needs to be. So we have a task force in Manchester that was appointed by the Planning Commission and is reports to the Planning Commission. They're studying the Depot Street property as well as other public town-owned properties that might be able to be used for workforce housing or for mixed-use housing, mixed-use developments that would involve commercial and housing so that the projects would work mathematically. The town put out a request for proposals that was returned in February, and several came in. The most promising of them, the most comprehensive of those, was a proposal from Shires Housing, along with funding quasi-public agency called Evernorth. I believe they do a lot of funding of affordable housing projects, workforce housing projects throughout the state. And the idea there were a couple of concepts. And the concerns sort of coming out of that are, one, is that the Depot Street property is right adjacent to the west branch of the Battenkill. And so flooding is an issue. And there's some question over whether the most recent study of where the flood stage is, whether that needs to be revisited or whether they got it right when they said that it was actually higher than where it had previously been reported. There's also concerns about, in order to meet that flood, in order to meet the conditions to build in a flood-prone area, you would need to gain some height. And so four stories, that's a small building in metro areas. In Manchester, it's a skyscraper. And folks are concerned that would change the character of the downtown area. There's also some folks who believe that should be a retail area. I mean, that's been prime retail real estate for since those shopping centers and those buildings were put up, and it should remain as such, and the housing should be somewhere else. There's also, concerns about it's difficult to evict folks, and if we have if they turn out to be bad tenants, and so there's some concern about demographics, and some of that. You can dismiss some of that as NIMBYism, but you could also look at folks' experience being landlords and say, well, yeah, that's a real concern. That's not simply just not in my backyard. But to one point or another, the other interesting thing about the Shires proposal is that they did not want to use the existing buildings along Depot Street. They wanted to build on the property that extends back towards Center Hill. So what would happen to those three buildings? That's another question that would need to be addressed.
I mean, would they stay shops in the near future?
That's
even after
certainly a possibility.
The lease is up, and
that's a
Manchester
possibility.
Designer Outlets might say, well, okay, we're all done.
Well, no, there's one existing tenant, I believe it's J. Crew,
J.
is
Crew,
going to remain there, at least for the time being. Those buildings do have some deferred maintenance issues, and that's another one of the clocks that is ticking on this. the town doesn't want to be in the landlord business, but the town also doesn't want to be in the building maintenance business. And those buildings, all buildings age, they need systems repaired and replaced, and that comes at a cost. And that's money that if the town is spending on upkeep of buildings that it doesn't want to own, that's money that can't be spent elsewhere.
It just occurred to me, I like to report on good news too, and the work that Martha Carey and Kara Bozart are doing over at the community food cupboard. Every time I go over there, I'm just amazed. And so the good news is that their expansion has been approved. I don't know where they are in the works on that, but basically it's going to double the size of it. If you go in there,
right.
I mean they're Tetrising in the food.
That's a good way to put it.
It's like there's just little corridors between big stacks of food and everything like that. But with in terms of federal funding drying up, COVID programs, things like that. More and more programs are ending, so they only expect demand to continue to increase, and so that's. But I just want to give them a shout out, I guess, for everything that they do and they're trying to. I mean, like Martha's even setting it up in the Kilburn room, It couldn't come soon enough that they're building that expansion, but they really want to. Dispel the stigma around, asking for help. Not necessarily just homelessness, but everyone runs into a tough month here or there, and just something I wanted to mention because I think that's important.
Well, there was a connection because when the town thought about possible uses for the Depot Street property, one of those was possibly moving the town offices back. The flooding issue and the cost of it really prevented that, but when that discussion was being had, the potential for expanding the food cupboard inside the building was something that was being addressed. So they thought outside the box, literally, and said, okay, well, we'll expand to the outside.
Yep.
And the select board approved that in pretty quick order.
It'll make things a lot easier for them too. Like right now, they're carrying the food in, like all of Martha and Kara's volunteers. They're carrying the food in now. With the expansion, they'll just be able to bring it in on pallets and
garage door.
So it'll be a lot better.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on from that then, Tory, and have you tell us a little bit about this big summit meeting you went to down at Bennington College. Actually, we were both there. I remember.
Yeah, I mean, right from the very beginning, it was it was great in the middle when they passed around the microphone and had everybody introduce themselves, because this is a bunch of people that I've only seen on names on emails. To actually put a face to all these names was good. But that's really the point, and the governor even said that to me. I got to meet the governor, so that was a first for me. But that was the thing that he said to me is and I know better than anyone as a teacher. There's a lot lost in translation by doing Zoom meetings. So I'm sure they've been having these meetings by Zoom and or whatever online. To actually get everybody in the same room and talking is huge, and that was something that the governor said. And it seems like they're really basing this around Project Vision, which was in Rutland in 2013, and that's why they had Jim Baker moderate it or lead the discussion. And but it's the one thing I will say is there's still mixed feelings about it from a lot of people. It's great that everyone was in the same room, and there's still more to find out about what. So it's Project Alliance is what it's going to be, is what they're calling it. And my understanding is it's going to be Bennington PD and UCS are going to kind of be at the head of it. But when it's going to be, how often it's going to be, there's still some things on that, and or things that are up in the air on that. There are people that have told me they don't feel like the representation of the people that are actually in need was good enough, and so there's hope from those people that they're going to be incorporated and outreach. They're calling for more outreach on a project like this, and so in order to build the trust with the community, for people to trust, because that's something, again, going back to the homeless thing, that's a lot of homeless people just don't trust the system to even engage with something with counselors and UCS and things like that, or with the police if they need help. And so in order to build back trust within the community, there has to be some outreach. And so and outreach means bringing those people in that are actually bringing them into the meeting to actually say, hey, this is what's actually going on. That's the feeling, from a lot of people, and so it's going to take a long time. I mean, the governor said it during his address. Like it's going to be, the hard part is actually doing the work. It's great that we're here. It's a big first step, but that's all it is a first step, and there's a lot of work still to be done.
And they're thinking of doing this as a statewide kind of initiative too, is the sense I got. Was that it wasn't just a Bennington County project, but
Bennington's kind of a lead or
a pilot project.
A pilot,
or
yeah.
whatever the right term is. I don't know. I mean, it comes certainly at an interesting time because the Bennington Police Department has been under a lot of pressure and a lot of stress, and they also mentioned they're also very understaffed. There's a lot of overtime being handed out.
And that's absolutely that. Like, they are understaffed, speaking to mental health, like we talk about mental health a lot, but one thing about mental health is the mental health of our first providers too. Not just police, but the medical and everybody. I think a lot of people are struggling right now in terms of that, especially since the pandemic. But also, one thing that I've heard from almost everybody is you're not going to arrest your way out of this problem.
Yeah.
And so we need other, and that's why it's good that they brought everybody together, because like everyone needs to work as a team on this. So UCS with the police and the school districts, and everybody needs to get on the same page for sure to make this work.
Maybe a quick tangent. The relationship between the community and the police is important, and it's certainly not as serious as the issues, mental health issues that were being discussed at the meeting you attended. But the Manchester police did something interesting. There's been a run of vehicle break-ins in some neighborhoods in downtown Manchester, and the police went to social media, and then incorporated us as well, and said, hey. And not only saying, hey, there's a problem, be on the lookout, they published a map. Here is where the break-ins happened. Here's the number of them. Here's a very blurry photo of someone we think we want to talk to about. And lo and behold, in a community this size where, people, it's a small town, and so people see what's going on and people know what's going on, and they're sort of banking on that as a means of stopping this string of break-ins and maybe bringing someone to justice. And police told me they had quite a bit of folks reaching back and saying, well, hey, here's some security footage I have a look. Or, hey, this is what I saw, or this is, I saw whatever it is they saw, whether it was a car or a person or what have you. That trust is really important there's larger conversations about police work in the U.S. and about communities feeling that their best interests aren't being looked out for, and that there's a trust issue. So something just as basic as reaching out and getting folks to pitch in on a run of car break-ins, that sort of indicates, I think it's an indication of ways that, starting at very basic building blocks that connection between the community and law enforcement can get rebuilt and strengthened.
Yeah, absolutely. In a few minutes we have left, Tory, I wanted to give you a chance to follow up a little bit on that summit, because we also have a distinguished guest coming in a couple of weeks. Senator Peter Welch is going to be
next
back in the
Tuesday.
same room.
Next Tuesday, same room at the Center for the Advancement of Public Action, CAPA over at Bennington College. But yeah, so hopefully it'll be an advancement of that, of a lot of the things that were talked about in the summit. Brian Campion, he'll be moderating it. I spoke to him about some of the issues that he wants to talk about with the senator, and obviously being chair of the Education Committee for the Senate, he's going to ask him a lot about helping out with getting some more federal funding for schools, hopefully. And so that'll definitely be a topic of conversation. I talked with them about the same things that came up in the summit also, is, drug rehabilitation, we need resources for that. We need resources for mental health. But the big difference is this one will be open to the public. And so I think that might provide a different dynamic. And, so obviously it could go anywhere from there as far as the questions that might come to the senator. But, Yeah, Brian was very hopeful and excited to have Senator Welch because he's so good at working with both sides of the aisle, and is somebody that can get things done, and somebody that can, a rural community like Vermont, it's not just a Vermont problem when you're rural and you don't have as many resources. So he's somebody that can get things done for us, just like he can help get things done for South Dakota and Montana too. So.
Well, I noticed today there was a press release that came out that Senator Welch and Senator Rick Scott of Florida,
Yes.
To less comparable figures I can barely imagine,
Not exactly peanut butter and jelly, no.
are co-sponsoring legislation on opioid research and mitigation.
Yeah, I'm actually working on that story today.
Ah.
Had a chance to talk to Margay Diamond at Turning Point in Bennington about the problem. It's interesting that this comes out now because Vermont recently reported its opioid overdose death figures for 2022, and the trend was disconcerting to say the least. Over like
All-time high,
237
I think,
deaths,
right?
all-time high, and the overwhelming majority of those involve fentanyl. And so that press release was about trying to figure out ways to improve the flow of data and improve our understanding, as well as providing some grant money for police to better understand and train their personnel in handling fentanyl. Also, my conversation, just to promote the story, also involves a couple other substances that are being used by users. That's a phrase. To lengthen the effect of fentanyl, and like one's a horse tranquilizer, and another is a medication used for nerve pain, gabapentin. And so they're seeing increased incidence of those substances being used in concert with fentanyl, and the problem is those substances don't respond to Narcan. But it was interesting to see the senator reaching across the aisle to Rick Scott, not exactly from Florida, not exactly ideological
Synergy.
synergy. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, well, and it's the sort of thing that I guess we've all been saying, gee, we wish we could see more of that sort of thing, where a Democrat and a Republican would be able to, agree on that. So that's good to see. In the 30 seconds or so we have left, Greg, I'd love to invite you to talk a little bit about the story you wrote about watching town meeting on live streams.
Sure.
That was
yeah.
That was what I really enjoyed reading.
Of course. Well, I mean, it would be remiss because we had a number of snowstorms, and so now I had to move, and so I was watching town meeting from a distance. And so I wrote a story about the fact that GNAT managed to live stream 6 of the 7, meant to live stream 7, wound up live streaming 6 because of technical difficulties in Londonderry. But just, it seemed to me that was an effort that, first of all, there's some technical advances that have been made here that allowed you to do that. And second of all, just the effort in having employees and perhaps the addition of some volunteers to make that happen, and to connect Vermonters with their government and with one of the traditions that makes Vermont unique is that that direct participation, in government. So yeah, it was. I would have rather been there in person, but it was great to watch it, and we certainly, in doing our job, appreciate what you at GNAT do to make some of those meetings available to us when we can't
staff,
be everywhere.
The staff definitely stood up to the occasion, and as the old song goes, 6 out of 7 ain't bad. Well, we're going to have to leave it there for today, gentlemen, but once again, thank you very much for making the time for coming down here, and great to do this in person as opposed to over a computer.
This is the first in-person one we've done for a while.
I know.
This is my first period.
Yeah.
Well, it won't be the last. Anyway, well, thank you all for being with us as well. I hope you found the program and the discussion interesting, and well, we'll see you again the next time. Meanwhile, take care. Have a great day.